I'm going to speak from down here because I want to engage a conversation. I have to thank Paul for that introduction. He forgot to tell you that I was president of my 8th grade class. Twice, actually. Yeah. Proud of that, staying in power. What I want to do today is talk about a challenge we have. Many of the folks in this room are keen leaders in the strategic use of technology to improve teaching and learning. And I know I'm, in some cases, speaking to the converted, and we're also speaking to the skeptical. We're also speaking to the people who are really into the research around this. And what I'd like to challenge us is to actually see if we can rise to the challenge in leading some core conversations about a build-out of the next generation of learning. People want to talk a lot about next generation learners, and there's lots of buzz about the new generation learners who are coming our way. And I think that's powerful, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I really want to talk about the challenge of us collectively building out the next generation of learning, which I think is a different kind of challenge. And part of the challenge is, in many ways, we are teaching and reaching students with tools we never really experienced as learners. And so we're trying to get our minds around them and figure out how we go with it. I love this juxtaposition of a couple books. One's called Grown Up Digital. The other one's called Educating the Net Generation by Diana Oblinger. And in this juxtaposition, it basically says, if you take the meaty 3 generations, the 3 big generations that are teaching and reaching and leading the institutions of education in this country, K through 20, you basically see these 3 big generations interacting with each other. You see some traditional age folks above that, and you see some younger folks just starting to come in, but these are the big 3 of the teachers, reachers, and leaders in the world of education, and increasingly in the higher ed space, the students that are in there. And different experiences with technology. Boomers grew up with TVs and typewriters and memos and a real strong kind of family focus. The Xers, my generation, grew up with video games and PC and emails and a real kind of individualist focus. Sociologists often call this the me generation. The net generation, the 16 to 30 plus year olds, are the ones who have grown up with digital technology as natives, right? They're the ones who've always known the World Wide Web. They're part of these vibrant sharing networks. The challenge is the differences in their experiences. So my niece, who's in the digital native group, in the Net Gen, came around the corner at a big family gathering. There's 40 people in the kitchen, and she excitedly announces that she had just Googled her boyfriend. Nana about passed out. Like, it's okay, calm down, Nana. There's nothing bad about that. And she's not married. It's okay. So after we resuscitated her, we helped her understand what that meant. We are living in a world where these generations are interacting with each other, and those experiences shape how we view the technologies. Just think about this. 15 years ago, if somebody presented us with a question of fact that we did not know the answer to, what did we typically have to do to try to respond to that query? Yeah, I mean, you had a number of options. If you were lucky enough to have an encyclopedia and you trusted them, you would go to the encyclopedia in your office or a reference book. You might use a lifeline, call a friend who you think might know that, right? Or you go to the library, and at the library you have to use the card catalog, which is based on the Dewey Decimal System, which tells you where in the library is the shelf with the book, with the chapter, with the information that you need. And if you're really in hell, you get microfiche, right? We all get this and can laugh about it. A 16-year-old doesn't know what in the world we're talking about, right? Because that's not their shared experience. If somebody asks a question of fact today they don't know the answer to, what do they do immediately? Right? And not only are they Googling it, now they're getting answer engines. If you're a math person, look at Wolfram Alpha, right? They put in a formula or a query, and it comes up with the answer, and it gives you all the places you can go to find out where that answer came from afterwards. But it tries to synthesize the answer for you and present it for you. So the challenge for us is just the differences in how we leverage our infrastructures and our technologies. And you see these generations trying to wrestle with this as we build out. I like the building metaphor because all too often what we end up is in conversations about infrastructure, and people think that means physical buildings. And then we talk about technology over here. The truth is, if you look at the consumer world, the healthcare world, increasingly people get it. It is a blended infrastructure of both physical and online coming together. And unfortunately, in the world of education, we often have a facilities group over here that are really good at what they do, and we have a technology group over here, and those two groups aren't coming together. In fact, they often don't even talk to each other, nor do they like each other, especially if you're talking about school boards or college boards. Those groups have to come together because what we have now is a blended infrastructure. And if you look at that blended infrastructure, we need to ask the building questions. And the building questions are this. What do we want to do in that building, right? With that infrastructure. If you say we want to attract, to serve, retain, and engage our students. Then let's vision, let's do some blue sky, let's find some benchmarks, let's pull that back together, let's build a plan, figure out how we're going to pay for it, how we're going to sustain it, and what that's going to look like. We know how to do buildings. We've done it for a long time. That set of infrastructure conversations and the discipline of infrastructure development is what we need right now in the build out of the next generation of learning. And we need to be able to drive some pretty powerful conversations so we can make the difference we probably need to make. What I'm going to argue is those conversations increasingly can be informed, helped, and catalyzed if we begin to enter them with some of the emerging insights that we're seeing from the research that you're probably presenting on and doing here. And what I'd like to do is just offer about 7 of the key emerging insights that I think help catalyze these conversations well. You know these things. Many of you know these things in your gut. You actually have done this stuff. You've produced research on it. I want to talk about the way we talk about these things and the way we present these in our own schools and in our own colleges. If we're going to make the change we need to enter these conversations and enter them the right way. To set that up, I want to do a neuroscience exercise. A friend of mine is a neuroscientist and helped me design this to talk about the way we enter these conversations. To do this, I'll need you to put all your devices down because you need both of your hands free. Okay. I know this will stop the tweet stream, and I'm like, what happened in that session? Go ahead. Okay. So you need both your hands. Put your hands up like this. Okay. On the count of 3, we're going to clap them together hard and leave them there. 1, 2, 3. Rub them up and down. Clasp them together. Put them in your lap. Now look at your hands. How many of you, by a show of hands, raise your hand if your right thumb is on top? Raise your hand. Look around the room, folks. Look around the room. Okay, raise your hand if your left thumb is on top. Look around the room. Okay, hands back down. When the researchers were studying this, they're studying something called autonomic functioning. Autonomic functioning is when your brain goes on autopilot. Our brain likes to wire things. We love to get things neurosynaptically wired and filed away so we know that's handled and we can get off to new things that require more effort. You have core autonomic functions you have no control over, like if you sneeze, you'll close your eyes. You have others that are more rote, like this one, all the way up to what they call brain autopilots. And brain autopilots are things like you arrive at work after a 30-minute drive and you don't remember a thing about the drive you just took. Right? I mean, it really is creepy sometimes. Like, did I kill somebody? What happened during that time? Right? My favorite that they use as an example is you get out of the shower and you're naked and you have no idea if you washed your hair or not. Right? Because, again, for some people that's not a problem. I understand that. We talk about that. What is interesting about this one, about the right thumb or left thumb, which is what they call a rote autonomic function, is they're always looking for the corollary, the thing that it's related to that probably led to that being the way it is. And they have some interesting ones, like they actually think sleep position is related to how you were positioned in the womb, which is a hard thing to study. Can you imagine trying to do that longitudinal study? Difficult. This one, they were looking for the correlate. What do you think they thought the correlate was? What do you put your right thumb or left thumb on top? What do you think they thought it was related to? Handedness. So the first thing was they thought for sure it was handedness. You just saw the data. Is it handedness? No, there's no correlation to handedness, which freaked them out. It's almost exactly 50-50, right? So they then went after it a bit more. What do you think the next theory was? Left brain, right brain. Whether or not you were right brain, left. They got real trendy on that. They really went after it. And there's a small correlation, but nothing that made them feel confident that that was actually the explanation. So then, they're grad students. They had time on their hands. They went after this thing. And they built cluster analytic models where they actually created profiles for the right thumbers and left thumbers. They did behavioral personality profiles, Myers-Briggs, and they created a profile for the right thumber and a profile for the left thumber. And they had the modal person in the right thumb group, the modal person in the left thumb group. And for the right thumbers, by the way, they have a great name for your group. They call you the sexy people. So you're the sexy people. Now, you can't change your thumbs now, so stop that. I'm sorry. It's wired in you. You can't help that. Somebody up here is like, can they raise their hands again? Left thumbers, they have a name for your group as well. They call you the sneaky people. You're the sneaky ones. Okay. Now, in a group this big, we're going to get 1 or 2 of these. They're people who put neither their right thumb nor their left thumb on top. They put their thumbs side by side. How many did we get? Raise your hand. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Researchers say these are the people to watch, right? Because these are the ones who are sneaky about being sexy. They don't want you to know. Okay. But let's go to the meat of this exercise, because there is a reason for this exercise. Go ahead and put your hands back up in the air. Count of 3, we're going to clap them again hard and leave them there. 1, 2, 3. Rub them up and down. Clasp them together. Now, leave your hands together. Put them up in front of your face just like this. Butterfly them out. Good. Slowly put them back the other way with the other set of fingers interlaced and the other thumb on top. Squeeze it. Put it in your lap. How does it feel? So wrong. Awkward, uncomfortable. Somebody said sexy. I heard that. Okay. I want you to get this for a second and feel it for a second, because part of our challenge in the work that you do every day and in thinking about technology in the world of education and trying to have these kinds of conversations is not necessarily the extremes, the people who are against everything or the people who are way too for whatever they're for. We'll talk about them in the close. Our real challenge is people who've put in 10, 20, 30, 40 years of their life into this thing called education, and they have it wired. They know how it's supposed to feel. They know what it's supposed to be like. And when you suddenly start doing the kind of things, you just read the sessions that won the poster awards and the presentation awards, you start doing those kinds of things, how does it feel to somebody who's dedicated their life to this proposition and these kinds of changes are coming their way? It doesn't feel sexy, right? And I think we have to be willing to understand that feeling, and I think we have to enter it not with a sales proposition, but with a conversation. And be willing to dive into this conversation to figure out how this is going to work for us. And one of the things I love about Sight is the idea is you're asking those kinds of hard questions. And what I'd like to propose is I think these are 7 of the most catalytic conversations that can get you there. Now, I've got good news. I only have about 10 more slides. Okay? It will not be death by PowerPoint. A lot of students have told me in focus groups that many people who use PowerPoint have no power nor a point, so I'm always careful about that. But what I have done is for each of these major conversation topics, I have linked out to research reports and demonstrations and articles to actually enable you to lead some of these conversations and go in your own way. And again, you know most of this stuff. I just want to talk about the way we enter these conversations. And I think one of the best things to do is begin with this idea of tuning the blend. We still have too many people that are busy having the argument, what's better, no technology on ground or online, lots of technology? Anybody having those conversations in your world? Okay, and our challenge is that's such a reductionistic, simplistic argument that it's tough to get your mind around it and figure out where you go. When the truth is how we work and how we play and how we live is radically blended today. I do a lot of work with docs, and docs will tell you we are driving them bananas because we go to WebMD and fully self-diagnose and come in with printouts to our doctor's visits. A friend of mine who is a pediatrician, he says when he talks to people, he talks to parents and kids and tells them something they might not really know or understand in the patient room, when he leaves to go get something, by the time he comes back, the parent is invariably on a smartphone looking up everything he just told them. They're immediately blending it. In fact, he's at the point now where he gets their email address, and after a visit, he will send them the email right after their visit with the follow-up information links because he knows they're going to go try to find it. And he wants them going to the right place, not going to a place that's going to give them misinformation. Okay? He gets the blend and understands how that's actually going to come together. What we are trying to do, I wrote an article last year for the Chronicle of Higher Education called Time to End the Family Feud, where I basically said it's time for us to bring the best of our traditional education together with new technology and figure out how we kind of build this infrastructure and pull it together. You get this. But this is a conversation where we are talking about the idea of having learning be the driving conversation, what is improving and expanding learning, and then asking about all the arrows in our quiver, all the tools at our disposal, on ground, online, and everything in between, and figuring out how we pull those things together to try to make a difference in the world of education. And there are exciting things happening in the world of blended learning. The problem is everybody then wants to get, again, simplistic again. They say, oh, good, you'll do half online, half on ground. The truth is what's really exciting about the blend right now is people are starting to say, let's figure out what is the best mix of these resources to get the best possible learning outcomes. And there are some simplistic things, or simplistic is the wrong term, but basic things like the flip model people are talking about. You've heard lots of conversation about Khan Academy. There's nothing rocket science about Khan Academy. It is micro lectures that PBS Adult Learning Service was doing in the 70s and 80s with videotapes. The flip model is nothing new. We just have a lower friction way of delivering the flip model. But it makes a lot of sense, right? The idea that when is a student stuck in math? They're stuck usually at 11 o'clock at night when they're home alone and they can't get help. And so the flip model basically says is curate digital lectures, whether they're yours or somebody else's, and then have the homework be watching the lecture where they can start and stop it on their own pace, and then have the classwork be let's work on the math together, you and your classmates, and then with a faculty member going around the room and working with the students. And it goes to this basic concept, which Khan didn't invent. It actually came out of Carnegie Mellon's Conversations on Learning, is this notion of how do we tune the blend to make the human moments precious. Love that line, by the way. How do we tune the blend to make the human moments precious? And I'll argue, in fact, I'm just going to reinforce what Carnegie says. What their research basically shows is that the spray and pray lecture is the least precious of the human moments. Okay? And we've known this for a long time. Akichi was talking about this. Lots of people have talked about the power of the deep interaction, the dialogue, the active learning. Again, we've known it for a long time. It's how do we leverage the digital technologies so we can displace what isn't necessarily the most powerful intervention and figure out how we get face-to-face and interactive. Bloom, back in '84, talked about this. If you look at all the education interventions that are out there, the one that has the most powerful effect again and again and again is personal tutoring. We just can't scale personal tutoring, right? High-powered, well-skilled, interpersonal tutors that work with you one-on-one, nothing can beat that. And part of it's because of the feedback loop, right? If they can really give you interactive feedback with lots of resources, you can tune that learning model. Western Governors University is built on the mentor model and that kind of interchange feedback model. The whole idea is how do you enable the faculty members to develop that one-on-one relationship and build that feedback in. What Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative does is they use human learning science to tune blended learning and online learning to try to find the best mix of how and what you put in front of students. And what they have shown is that they've done things like they've taken advanced statistic courses that they've tuned with this model, and they've put them in front of at-risk students, and they've taught them statistics that usually are taught in 16 weeks. They've taught them in 8 weeks with higher outcomes, better outcomes. And what they've shown is you can go faster and you can get better by tuning the blend. But to me, what's interesting about that is not what they did. It's the conversation. The conversation says, let's let learning be the goal, and then for us to do the research to figure out what mix of all this stuff actually improves learning in the highest way, and let's figure out how we do this in a multivariate way, right? And then look at the interaction effect about how it lays in. Does that make sense? It's not a hard conversation, but it's a conversation that really matters because the simplest and most problematic argument we get into, or the most simplistic and challenging argument we get into, is what's better, online or face-to-face. And the truth is, how many of you have a teacher in your memory right now that was transformational and important and on your development? In fact, they made a huge difference in your life. You can think of that person right now. Okay? How many of you can also think of a teacher that you would not wish on your worst enemy? Right? They both exist. Okay, so it's not just the teacher variable actually radically matters in this, right? And their skill and will in being able to leverage these kinds of technologies. It is a complicated learning challenge, and for us it's being willing to step into that blend and ask how that mix. Once you've done that and you get by the blend, and you have to do this, you have to do the blend conversation, you can't go on to the other stuff until they actually get in their bones that this is a blended model and the blend actually can add value in some ways. When they get that, you can begin talking about infrastructures that are going to help them as well. Do me a favor. Pick one of your devices that you have on your person. Many of you have laptops, iPads, iPhones, and everything else, Androids. Pick one of them, and I want you to look left and right and find somebody who looks relatively trustworthy, and I want you to trade your device with that other person. Go ahead and trade them out. It's okay. You'll survive. Okay, I want to make, while you're holding your friend's device, I want to make 3 quick observations. 1, there's a whole group of people in this room that are feeling really good right now because you just traded up. It's a great exercise. You like what's happening here. Two, I'm a student of human behavior. I have 2 degrees in human communication science, so I love people watching. And one of my favorite things about this exercise is when there's one group of people that when they hand the device over, feel the need to give you a mini orientation session to their device. Look, it does this, it does this. I'm really excited about it. There's another group of people that, for whatever reason, feel the need to either lock or turn off their device before they hand it to you, right? I won't describe motive, I just know it happens. Third observation is that the longer I let this exercise go, the more the anxiety in the room goes up because somebody's touching your digital device. We have created these blended and mobile infrastructures for how we live, for how we play, and for how we work. We get information and we get advice. People are panicking right now about their device being out of their hands. So go ahead and hand them back quickly before you all have coronaries. You'll be okay, right? I did this once in Boston, and there was a really well-dressed guy in the front row, young guy, maybe in his 20s, who was sitting next to an older gentleman, and they did the switch, and the young guy, I thought he was going to die. I mean, he looked like he was in an absolute panic, and I really was worried about this guy. And so after the session, I asked him, I said, boy, you looked really worried about that. And he told me, he goes, you have no idea. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I have been having all kinds of problems with my boss. He has been the ultimate jerk for the last month. And my friends and I have this whole circle thing where we try to bolster each other up because this guy is such a jerk. And we send texts to each other to kind of bolster each other about what a jerk this guy is. And I had to hand my BlackBerry to him. I'm sorry. Luckily, nothing happened to the guy. But I want to point it out because we do have these digital infrastructures for how we live, play, and work. And what is clear is that is extending now into the world of education. And you've got kids who are so used to these infrastructures, and they ask the brutal question, why do I have to go back in time to learn in your environment? Why can't I leverage the resources that are at my disposal and figure out how we do this? And there are all kinds of conversations around this that you can end up having, and important conversations like, how do you get students to focus when it's time to focus? How do you get them to turn off technology when it's time to turn off technology? How do you stop them from going surface level and go deep with text and with experiences? And they're all really important questions, and I actually think matter, because I think one of the most important things we can teach our students is not only the power of these tools, but the importance of knowing when to turn them off. And if the answer is they're always off, that feels disingenuous, right? It doesn't feel authentic. They need to understand the mix, right? And knowing when to use the tools and when not to use the tools and figuring out how to deploy it. What is clear? I mean, I think about my own kids. I have 4 kids, which is, by the way, I come from a family of 9 kids. I have an African-American brother, Native American brother, and a Korean sister. In addition to that, we had 25 foster kids in my family that rotated through my house during the time I was growing up. My mom was a special care nurse, and she specialized in newborns to 3-year-olds with special needs, and so we had every flavor of challenge you can imagine in our household. So my mom was a special care nurse. My dad was out of his mind. So my 4 kids, my mom calls a starter family. But in our own environment, I think about the mix that we have within it. So, for example, we've got a Netflix account for the family. At any given time, you can have somebody on the TV watching Netflix, on the computer watching Netflix, on the iPad watching Netflix, and on the iPhone watching Netflix, all hitting the same account. We have a Kindle library, and in that Kindle library, if I'm home and I use my Kindle, I can actually read the book. I can page mark the book, but then if I'm using the iPad out on the deck, I use the Kindle app on the iPad, get to the same book, pop up the same page. I'm stuck at the DMV, which I was a couple of weeks ago, and I had 2 hours on my hand to sit in line. I thought, wow, I probably want to go back to read that book. I actually downloaded the Kindle app on my iPhone, which I hadn't done yet, went right to my account, pulled up the book, right to the page I was on, and began reading again. Right? This kind of mobile, blended infrastructure for how we live. That's the kind of infrastructure our students are beginning to access with digital textbooks and open learning resources that are out there. And we've got to figure out how we arm them to be able to leverage the resources that are at their disposal. And you're seeing the expansion of e-textbooks and the modularization of the digital curricular resources are going to be more and more enabled by blended and by mobile infrastructure. And if you do blended and if you do mobile, then you can start asking conversations about how we get deeper into getting serious about play and simulations. And if you haven't seen Jane McGonigal's TED Talk on the whole notion of gaming, and she has this kind of radical theory that gamers will save the world. She has a great book called Reality is Broken, where she talks about the power of gaming. And one of the things she points out is something that James Paul G. from Arizona State talks about a lot, is this idea that when you're how many of you have somebody in your world that plays games a lot, video games a lot, right? How much effort will they put in to go from one level of a game to the next level of the game, right? They'll forego food, sleep, bathroom breaks, and they'll work with 5, 10 people at the same time in the same room, hundreds of people online, if not thousands of people online, all around the goals of getting from one level to the next. And for many of them, to get from one level to the next, what do they have to do? They have to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and ability at one level to be able to, and have it assessed to be able to go to the next level. What does that sound like? Oh, yeah, it kind of sounds like mastery-based learning, proficiency-based learning, whatever you want to call it. But what is clear is people are used to that kind of framework and are beginning to use that kind of simulation and game technology in a big way. And what's interesting now is the conversations that are happening around how we can develop and build out the simulation-based world, the game-based world. And I love Chris Dede from Harvard when he talks about this notion that he won't use the term gaming in the world of education too much because people think it sounds not serious, right? They don't get the idea that this can be brutally serious, right? It's deep contextual learning, which we've known, by the way. Deep contextual learning and simulations and games are not new. They are thousands of years old in the world of education. We just have new tools to do simulations and games. And so for us, it's figuring out how we use what have always worked and kind of use it in a lower friction, higher value kind of way. And that's what you're beginning to see in some of the game-based simulations that are out there and in some of the major conversations. Our problem is we are just frustrated by how easy it might be for them to learn. Some people just really have a hard time with that. We're about to go on spring break next week with our 4 kids, and we'll load all of our kids, all the kids, a dog, a bird, everybody into our minivan, and we will drive from Austin, Texas to Western North Carolina. It's about a 20-hour, 21-hour trip, which we will do in one shot, okay? Somewhere along the line, one of our kids invariably will complain about which movie is playing. And in that moment, I always have to take a big and deep breath. Because I'm saying to myself, they're complaining about which movie is playing in the car. Anybody with me about why I'm upset about that? Because what did we have to do in the car on our road trips, right? You know, we're in the back of the station wagon with 9 kids bouncing around with no seatbelts, looking backwards at the car behind us, right, as they're driving. I mean, and that's us for 20 hours. And they're complaining about which Harry Potter they're watching. And again, they're on iPads, they're playing Sync DSs, they're doing that. And again, and there's a part of me that is frustrated that they're not sharing the experience that I shared. But when I really think about it, I'm happy they're not. You know, it is kind of the rolling couch for them. But I can also, we're pretty well trained. When it's time to turn it off, we turn it off and we do what we're going to do as a family. But I'm happy they don't have to go through that. I think in the world of education, we have to realize they're about to have a very rich and very robust learning environment that is going to be probably a lot more fun than what we had. And we have to be okay with that, right? They are going to have more fun with it, and they're probably going to learn at a higher level. And I think that's great, is they're going to be able to jump into this, and we have to understand how they're going to interact with these kinds of resources. 2 examples I want to talk about with this, and how we surface information to people and how this gamification of stuff is coming along. If you haven't seen the Ford Fusion dashboard, this is the Ford Fusion dashboard. Upper right-hand corner, you'll see the plants with the flowers. Some of you can see it. Many of you might be able to. But one of the things I love about this story is they looked at a problem. And their problem was the Ford Fusion drivers were not getting the gas mileage they were supposed to be getting out of their car. And when they did the analysis, they figured out it's because the drivers were driving the car incorrectly. How does that go over when you tell the customer, it's your fault and here are the 10 things you're doing wrong, right? Doesn't go over well. So they had to find another way to get that feedback back and help them learn about how to drive the car correctly. So an engineer, with the help of a company called IDEO, came up with this idea of gamification, of taking the data and the feedback and actually presenting it to people in a different way. And they created this little plant game. And basically it says, if you want the plant to grow, here's what you need to do and how you drive your car. If you do this, the plant will grow, begin to thrive, leaves will come out, flowers will bloom, and you'll have a green plant on your dashboard. If you drive your car incorrectly, the flowers will begin to close, the leaves will turn brown, it'll wither and die. So if you give your car to your son and he gives it back at the end of the weekend and the plant is dead, you know what happened to the car when it was gone, right? But the idea is getting the right information to the right people in the right way in the right time. We'll talk about that in a bit when we come to analytics. But it's about the interaction to be able to change the behavior and be able to do it in a way that's kind of lower maintenance and higher value. And it's going to get even more interesting. And I just like using the demo from the Connect to talk about this just a little bit. Many of you have the Connect systems in your house, and the Connect systems are getting even more interesting because they use facial recognition and they use body scanning instead of controllers. So I want to use two quick examples. One is the example of a family that is playing online. Each member of the family is playing a different role in a racing team, and they're racing against 10 other families over the internet.
Your tires are toast. Go to the pits.
All right, I'm going in.
Okay, I'm ready.
So my wife's extended family is from North Carolina, and they're big NASCAR fans. They tell me that is way too slow. There's no way that that family is going to win. This one I think is even more interesting for us because it's a combination of avatar, video conferencing, interactive shopping. So watch how this works out.
Hook me up with Sarah. Hey, so did you get a dress for the party yet? No. Oh my gosh, it's in a week. Here, you have to see the one I found for you. That's the one. I love it. You should get it. See you tonight.
So their biggest problem with this system is the average person makes their avatar 15% skinnier than they actually are. Really screws up sizing. It's a problem for this, right? And I want to push us a bit. I mean, the folks here at UT Austin are incredibly progressive in getting people thinking about what might be next. But it is going to get very interesting in the next 5 to 10 years as the blended mobile device and the augmented learning, gamification of the learning stuff is coming together. It's going to get very interesting. And there's some things that worry me about that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think we have to it's going to get more interesting than we can imagine. I remember being at an educational technology conference in 96, 97 when Bill Daggett, many of you know, was talking about GPS systems. And he was on the early advisory boards of people who were building the GPS systems. No one had really seen them, and he was talking about these satellites all around the Earth, and we were going to have these connections to our cars, and they were going to have these little maps on our car dashboards that were going to tell us where we were going. You'd put in an address, it would tell you when to turn left, when to turn right, and everybody kind of laughed and looked at it and was kind of like thinking, this is fantastic. After the conference, we were actually part of the organization that was running the conference. There were 3,000 people there. The evaluations were pretty unanimous. Really interesting, engaging speaker, fantastic, interesting idea, radically impractical. Please don't ever bring that. That's never going to happen in my time. Right? How many of you have used the GPS system in the last few days? Right? Okay. In the last few minutes, right? Okay. The challenge right now is it's sometimes going to be harder for us to think how different it's going to be, but it's going to be interesting as we get this blend and the mobile infrastructure together with the simulation-based learning. And for us, it's going to be figuring out how we weave that infrastructure together and then make use of the learning network that's beginning to emerge. And I want to get us beyond social networks because people want to talk about the social network. I want to talk about that being leveraged as a learning network. The European conversation around personal learning networks, I think the PLN is the one to really own. And it's the idea of not only helping teachers develop a PLN, but helping our students own the curation of a PLN. What is their personal learning network? Their set of resources and connections that they use to be able to get information and filter information. The problem is our PLN is more and more defined for us by our demographic and by the marketers that kind of put us in a hole. And a really well-rounded person should be able to kind of in some ways curate their own PLN and be able to get information and be able to pull that stuff together, which is more and more difficult. Students are going for this stuff. If you've seen ratemyteacher.com or ratemyprofessor.com, one of my favorite things about ratemyprofessor.com is the students are, when you do focus groups with the students, they will tell you, you can't tell me that the teacher matters that much and not give me information about the teacher. Okay, when I look at the schedule and the only thing I get is a name or TBD, it doesn't help me with anything. I want to know some more things. And by the way, this kind of information has always existed, especially in higher education. It's existed in a big way, in a very detailed way, for hundreds of years. Who owned that information? Fraternities and sororities have always had that information in the files. Now we just have a more ecumenical way for that to be distributed and for people to get access to it. By the way, Rate My Professor has a new feature called Professor Strike Back, where professors can upload a video responding to what's being said about them on the site. And by the way, my favorite, I got to warn you, if you just watch the videos, almost every video I've seen so far, the professor has reinforced the very thing being said about them on the site. So you got to be, the authenticity of it is pretty brutal. But what is clear is we have a vibrant ecosystem of a personal learning network coming together. And what I mean is we have the rise of this interchange of curricular resources, for example. The publishers are getting more digital or modular, and they're creating more open infrastructures to share what they're doing. You've got the open content movement with Rights Connections and OER Commons and Hippocampus and the rest. And what you look at with the open content movement is that great teachers have always used the CASE method. CASE stands for copy and steal everything, right? Somebody else does it well, you bring it in and figure out how you're going to use it. Now we have these networks that are trying to pull that together. The problem is it's still radically disorganized. We still have kind of a junk drawer effect of the open content that's out there. And what we're trying to do is figure out how we can more thoughtfully curate the digital curricular resources that are out there. I will argue this is a great conversation to have in schools and in colleges, which is how do we develop the discipline of curricular resource strategy, which is let's define the learning outcomes we're going after and then get a group of faculty and librarians and instructional technologists to go curate the best digital resources that will help a student achieve those learning outcomes. Let's develop the master playlist, if you will, of print, digital media, games, whatever it is that helps the student get that, and then let's connect that to the assessment data, and let's do some CQI on those curricular resources and figure out how we keep getting them better and better over every year. Does that make sense? It's a simple process, but it means we have to connect the dots to be able to do that. And I always talk about the big three. And the big three is you want to curate together the best of build, buy, and share. Build, buy, and share is the curriculum you build, the curriculum you buy from the publishers, which you want more digital or modular and connected, and that you're going to share in the open content world. Figure out what from those three sources makes up your curricular resource bank that you're going to use for your classes. By the way, great teachers have always done curricular resource strategy. It's just been mostly print-based. Now we have other kinds of models to be able to pull that together in this kind of a learning network. And by the way, we're not the only ones curating. What's happening now is you're seeing the rise of edupunks. And edupunks are the people who are end-running the institutions and they're learning on their own despite us because there are 2 million courses available on the internet. There's open content everywhere and they think they can learn it on their own. If you haven't read DIYU, it stands for Do It Yourself University. There's a follow-up book by Anya Komenetz called An Edupunk's Guide to Getting a Credential. Okay? And it's all about how they're going to find their own learning resources and now they're coming back and saying, accreditors, don't just accredit the institution, provide some kind of accreditation for my learning because I think I already know this stuff. Right? And the idea here is I don't think it's going to be a huge market, but boy, it's going to get bigger and bigger the more the open resources are available. Again, let's put the pieces together. With a blended, mobily enabled, simulation and game-based world together with this power of a personal learning network of resources that allow us to kind of bring it all to life, map that together with in-class resources that allow you to do stuff in classes that are even more powerful than you have the Promethean board over here with a virtual Rome tour you can go on. I've been in multiple sites in the last few years that has actually done holographics, where I was at a community college where they talked about the human brain and an 8-foot brain floats over the class and people get up and walk around the brain. Do you think that's going to be interesting for students? Yeah, I think so. The virtual surgery center at University of Toledo is stunning. They can reproduce any disease state in a virtual cadaver, right? That is going to be interesting as we start having these things pulled together. And what is going to be hard for us is pulling all that stuff together, and this is a big bang for the buck, folks, and where you have to anchor this conversation, is we have to bring a tough-minded, learning-centered focus to this and be willing to go after the data. We have to anchor this in analytics. The interesting thing about the analytics conversation is our data initiatives in education, for the most part, are radically off target, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we know analytics in our bones. How many of us shop at Amazon? Okay, how long does it take Amazon to run a data model about us and do a predictive model and get back to us recommendations about what else we might like to buy? Like about a week or a month or a... No, okay, it takes under a second for the core algorithm. It only takes longer because of your bandwidth, right? And their entire profit model is based on instantaneous cross-sell, upsell. It's all right, and Facebook suggests friends, iTunes suggests music, Netflix suggests movies, and many of it's not very sophisticated. When you actually get under the covers and understand their base algorithms, not too sophisticated. It gets better over time as they start building the predictive models. We're getting more and more used to this. The challenge for us is realizing what we have in the world of education does not quite have the same velocity nor the same target. Let's talk about velocity for a second, the speed of that data getting out. We in the world of education get interested in dropouts or challenges in schools, and we say, let's collect some data about that and figure out what's happening. We get a team together to go get the data. They come back together, and they all have their spreadsheets, and it's a war of the spreadsheets. And the first conversation is people are angry about the quality of the data. So you have to go back out and collect some more information. You come back together to have that conversation again. They say, this is really important. Looks like we have some real challenges with dropouts. Let's bring in the faculty. Let's bring in the teachers. They come in. They're mad they weren't included from the beginning. You got to start over. You start over, go collect some more information, bring that back together, realize you still have that problem, you bring it up to the school level administration. They're nervous because the data makes them look bad, so they want you to get some comparative data from other schools or colleges that tell you where you fit in that mix. So now you have to go to other schools and colleges and get comparative data, but you have to get data permissions to use their data, anonymize it, and then compare it to yours. That takes months to be able to pull that together. You finally get that together. Your administration feels comfortable being able to surface that to your board. You bring it to your board, but you have to get on the board calendar. You get on the board calendar, you present to your board members. They don't know what you're talking about. It takes you a couple months to educate them on what the data actually mean. They think this is really an important problem. You need somebody to lead this initiative. So now you do a national search. You do a national search, and it takes you about 6 months to hire that person, get them on board. And their first recommendation is you have to buy some software to tackle this problem. So now you have to do an RFP. You do an RFP, you take that out there, it takes you 6 to 8 months to do the RFP, bring the companies in, do the demos, hire the company, and their first recommendation is for you to actually hire consultants to install the software and teach people how to be able to use the software. What has happened to the students about whom you collected the data? Yeah. Their kids have enrolled. Okay. Somewhere between I'm just going to be kind. I'm going to say it takes us at least a year to use a student's data to help that student before it actually gets cycled back and it can be used in a way to help that student, as opposed to Amazon's 1 second. Somewhere between a year and a second is a middle ground, right, for us to be thinking about this. And I would even argue it's not even about the speed, it's also about the target. Most of our data initiatives, if you take a step back, the data initiatives are not about getting it to the front lines. It's about getting it to the principals, it's about getting to school boards, getting to administrators and legislators, when the real power of data is actually getting it on the ground. This article, Penetrating the Fog, Analytics in Learning and Education, makes the case, but I want to make it even clearer than this article does. We are going to be able to do powerful things with this big next-generation learning architecture when we are able, at core, to be able to build an infrastructure that gets the right data to the right people in the right way. Okay? Right data to the right people in the right way. That's when you can start driving change. And what you're seeing is some pretty exciting examples of this. I work with a company called Civitas Learning that is actually driving this in terms of thinking about apps around this. But I'm just going to give you some examples that are actually in practice right now. If you go to Purdue University, for example, they actually said, let's look at what they're doing in the learning management system, and let's just analyze the course that's wiping out the most students. And they picked chemistry. And they said, let's just run a predictive model on the learning management system, and we can get it to the faculty members and tell them what students are behind and give them some information. And John Campbell, the chief scientist there, said, that sounds interesting, but let's not just give it to the faculty member, let's give the data to the students. And they developed a simple little traffic light that was green, yellow, and red. And basically said 3 things. Students like you who did the kind of things you're doing based on our predictive model succeeded. Green light, keep doing that. And every time they logged back in, they saw whether their light was green, yellow, or red. Students like you who did the kind of thing you're doing didn't do so hot. Yellow, here are some things you might want to think about. Here are some people you might want to talk to about that problem. Students like you who did the kind of things you're doing failed miserably. Stop now. Red light, talk to somebody, right? And that was shown to the student every time they logged in. It completely fixed the problem of that course being a weed-out course. By the way, if you have students at Purdue, they should pass chemistry, right? But what this allowed them to do is, I heard of the conversation about growth mindset, is it enables the growth mindset, because now you know when you're on target or off target, and you can do self-regulation, right? And getting that feedback back to the student. If you're taking a course that only has a midterm and a final, 2 feedback points is really hard to self-correct. Okay? And this idea is being about getting data back to students as early as possible. I'm going to argue that we're going to really make the difference with this kind of infrastructure when we build the right kind of infrastructure to get the right data to the right people in the right way. And I'm going to argue our target should be getting data to students and getting data to faculty members so they can tune the learning journeys and actually self-regulate. Are you with me on that? The only way that happens is if we raise our voices on this, because all the energy on data right now is about legislators and administrators, not about frontline learning. And what you look in the consumer world and the healthcare world, when it made a difference, is when the data got to the front lines. Because when it gets to the front lines, you guys can tune learning journeys and do some powerful stuff with it, and that's how it matters. Final conversation is the to what end conversation. And what I'm going to argue is the core ends of education aren't changing. We have different skill sets and different jobs that are emerging, but you hear the chorus of the liberal arts and deeper learning more than ever before. People want critical learners, they want creative learners, they want social learners, but increasingly they want courageous learners, people who are willing to learn new things and be able to dive into this in a big way. All of these are the core of the liberal arts we care and love. And what's fascinating about this is just how more important they are than ever before. The critical learning side of this is pretty complicated, the world we live in right now. And you can be targeted and you can be manipulated like never before. You want to read a political tome that will scare the pants off you, read the book Microtrends by Mark Penn, and you realize how granular they're getting at politically marketing to us, and you understand why critical learning is probably going to be important. Creative learning, people want people who can get out of their box and think differently. Social learning. Why do most people, or how do most people get their jobs in this country? Is it because of the degrees they get from us? Still, most people get jobs because of social networks that they're actually in, people who know people who know people. Why are most people fired in this country? Take out economic downturn. Why are most people terminated from their jobs? Is it because of technical incompetence? No, it's interpersonal conflict. They can't get along with other people. In fact, the folks at SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Managers, they have a joke. They call it the jerk effect. Either you're fired because you are a jerk or you're fired by a jerk. But there's always a jerk involved in that situation somewhere, right? But if that's what gets you hired and what gets you fired, don't you think social learning should be a radically important part of our curricular conversations? And understanding how we leverage social learning in a technological construct, it really, really matters. I'm on the board of the Global Online Academy, which is a network of some of the highest quality private schools in the country that are now developing a network of online learning courses that they can share. And one of the reasons they're doing it is because they know that they want their learners to experience online learning before they get to the university, because it's the world they're going to be walking into, and they don't want it to be a surprise to them what they have to do in that environment. The social learning side of it is about helping them understand what to put on a social network, what never to put on a social network, how to work in teams, how to actually build bonds between people, how to turn all that stuff off and develop one-on-one conversations and develop personal relationships. All that really matters. And the courageous learning side of this is this idea of being able to learn how to learn. I love this quote. In the times of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. The learned usually find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. And the neuroscientists would call this the rookie effect. In fact, the neuroscientists say if you want to stave off Alzheimer's and dementia and keep neuroplasticity at its best, you want to be a rookie every year. Try something that stretches you into the rookie zone, where you're trying to figure out what you're going to be doing and where you're going to be going. By the way, the students will tell you in conversations that the best way for them to learn these 4 things is to actually see the people around them in their education environment using these skills. So as we think about our next generation of learning, can we evidence critical thinking and really understanding what's working and what's not? Can we be creative about our solutions? Can we get along as we have these conversations? And do we have the courage to actually take on some of these challenges and figure out where we're going to go on the road ahead? Now, most of you have seen Charlie. I want to use Charlie as an example of insanity. Definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting. Okay, I just want to use this as an example. Most of you have seen this. I just want to make sure we get this out there. Oh, Charlie might not work. Oh, that's a bummer. Charlie's down for the day. Okay. We're going to change out. Sorry, Charlie. If you're going to lead these conversations, folks, 2 final ideas. If you're going to lead these conversations, buckle up, because you are going to experience not only people who are wrestling with how uncomfortable this is and who don't find this sexy, or who maybe are sneaky if thinking about how they're going to get around it. You're going to experience the extremes. And the extremes are people who generally come from like camps I call the loud voices. One group I like to call the caustic cynics. Caustic cynics are angry about everything. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. You bring manna from heaven, it's too salty for them, and they're mad, right? A friend of mine calls them the cave people, colleagues against virtually everything, right? How many of you can think of a cave person in your world somewhere, right? And if you can't think of the cave person, you might be. Just got to own that. They're equaled in the challenges they cause by the true believers. The true believers will overpromise and underdeliver, and they're going to cut the credibility out of your initiatives. Whatever they're into, everybody should be into. Online learning will fix everything in the world of education, right? And the challenge is those 2 groups of loud voices dominate our conversations around this stuff. And I'll just be blunt. Many times they're populated by bullies, right, who own the conversation. And people walk up to that and they go, going back to work, right? They're just not going to deal with it. The only way we're going to be able to take this on, folks, is if folks like you who are doing this kind of thoughtful research about what this road ahead might look like, if we have the courage to get in the mix, calm down the caustic cynics, temper the true believers, and lead these kind of conversations and figure out where we go. Are you with me on that? Yeah. Last idea. I was doing some work in Singapore and had a really interesting example of this principle. I was doing work with the Polytechnics at the University of Singapore. And when you travel in Singapore and you look like me, you stand out just a little bit, right? Singapore is predominantly Chinese. I'm at least a foot taller than everybody in the country. And as I'm walking around, I really often felt like a deep outsider. And when I was at the airport leaving, it was worse. People were staring at me nonstop. And I was trying to figure out why they were staring at me, and then I got it. There was a guy across the airport who was about 6'6", 260 pounds, clearly from Texas. Okay? I know he's from Texas because he's got a big cowboy hat on, huge belt buckle, and he's telling everybody, I'm from Texas, and he's throwing stuff around and screaming. And I've come, graduate of UT Austin, live in Austin, Texas, and the worst part about this whole thing is I realize why everyone's looking at me. They all think I'm with him, right? And, this guy's horrible. I mean, he's one of those guys where he's just screaming at everyone, and his wife is apologizing in his wake. Have you ever seen that dynamic? So I just try to get away from him as fast as I can, and I get upstairs, and we're on Singapore Airlines about to fly from Singapore to Japan back to Los Angeles, and I end up about 4 people behind him in line, and oh, Lord, this guy is just a mess. And he's now in front of this 4'11" Japanese woman just excoriating her. On American Airlines, this would never happen, and he's screaming and yelling, and veins are popping, and he's spitting, and he's just out of control. People beside me are like, can you do anything with him? I'm like, I don't know who he is, and I'm like, why am I in charge? I have no idea. But he's going nuts. But what amazed me was not him. I've seen people like that before. What amazed me was her, this 4'11" Japanese woman who was in complete control of this situation. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't got stern. She hadn't flipped her hair, called for help, or anything. She was just easy and comfortable. The louder he got, the softer she got. The crazier he got, the more calm she was. And it was like watching a Zen master at work, right? It was 10 minutes of this dynamic, and I'm going, this is amazing, because she never broke. She stayed calm the entire time, and she finally got him on his way. And I get up there a few people later, and I don't know why I felt the need to do this, but on behalf of all America, I am so sorry. You know we're not like that. And she was laughing, and I was laughing, and I go, but I got to tell you, I don't know what kind of training they have at Singapore Airlines, but wow, that was impressive. Your ability to control that guy was stunning. And she goes, it's not training. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, I'm Japanese. And I go, okay. She goes, we understand bocce. And I said, bocce. She goes, it's like your karma, which I thought's funny because karma's Indian, not American, but I kind of got the idea. And she goes, well, for example, today that man is flying to Columbia, South Carolina. I said, okay. She goes, but now his bags are flying to Columbia, South America. She said, that's bocce. It's the basic idea that the spirit you put in will be the spirit you get out. Folks, this is going to be hard work. These are going to be challenging conversations, but make no mistake about it. Education is the pathway to possibility in this country. It is the single biggest disruptor of the cycle of poverty. It is the game changer for our students. It is worth every bit of our effort, every bit of our courage, and every bit of our insight to figure out how we can build out the next generation of learning. Thanks, folks.